Max Harrison seemed like an ordinary younger brother, overshadowed by his successful sibling Richard Harrison, until jealousy turned deadly. What if the very person you trust most becomes your worst nightmare? In this shocking true crime story, Max didn't just want to hurt Richard. He weaponized one of history's deadliest diseases to try to kill him. This is the chilling tale of how a family rivalry spiraled into a biological nightmare. The Harrison family was the kind of family that everyone admired in their small town. Their home was a beautiful two-story house with a neatly trimmed lawn and bright flower beds that changed with the seasons. The house sat on a quiet street where neighbors greeted each other with friendly waves and children played freely in the yards. To many, the Harrisons looked like the perfect family, successful, well-respected, and close-knit. Richard Harrison, the older brother, was a man who had worked hard all his life. He had built a successful business from the ground up, one that brought prosperity not only to himself, but also to the town. People knew him as a dedicated entrepreneur, someone who had a vision and was determined to make it real. He was calm, confident, and carried an air of authority wherever he went. His success earned him respect, admiration, and even a little envy from those around him. Max Harrison, Richard's younger brother, lived in the same house. Unlike Richard, Max's life had never quite taken off the way he had hoped. He held several jobs over the years but struggled to find stability or a clear direction. Max was quieter than Richard, less sure of himself, and often seemed overshadowed by his older brother's achievements. Yet, despite the differences, the two brothers appeared close. They shared meals, family celebrations, and many ordinary days that made the house feel warm and full of life. However, beneath this calm surface, there was a tension few could see. Max often felt invisible in his brother's shadow, and over time, that feeling began to grow into something darker. The more successful Richard became, the more distant Max seemed to retreat into himself. Friends noticed that Max stopped inviting people over, and that he often kept to his room, staring at the walls or pacing late into the night. The family dog sometimes whimpered when Max passed by, as if sensing the unrest in the house. Neighbors sometimes whispered about the brothers in private conversations. Some wondered if the two ever argued, but no one could say for sure. Richard and Max were private men, never sharing their feelings or problems openly. The only thing clear was the difference in their lives. Richard drove a new car, wore fine clothes, and traveled often. Max had an older car that broke down regularly, and his clothes looked worn. The contrast was hard to ignore. As months passed, small cracks began to show. Max's behavior grew stranger. He became secretive about his activities and would avoid eye contact with even close friends. On several occasions, he was seen visiting places no one expected: a laboratory on the edge of town, a medical supply warehouse, and once, a research facility that required special access badges. No one knew why he was going to these places, and Max never volunteered any explanation. Richard, for his part, continued to focus on his work and the family's public image. He was preparing for a major business deal that would take his company to new heights. At social events, Richard was charming and confident, while Max looked uncomfortable and detached. At family dinners, Max often ate in silence, pushing his food around the plate without a word. One evening, the tension between the brothers reached a breaking point. Richard noticed Max had been acting even more withdrawn lately and tried to reach out, but Max brushed him off coldly. The distance between them, once easy to overlook, now felt like a wall, that neither wanted to climb. In his heart, Richard sensed that something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The smile on Max's face never quite reached his eyes. Despite these growing troubles, the town still saw the Harrisons as a family to admire. They were invited to community events and praised for their contributions. Richard was often seen as a role model, a man who had achieved the American dream. Max remained more of a mystery, a shadow moving quietly behind the bright light of his brother's success. Behind closed doors, however, the story was very different. Max's jealousy of Richard's success had turned into a deep bitterness. He blamed his brother for his own failures and began to harbor dangerous thoughts. The dreams of equality and brotherly love that once existed between them had faded into a silent war. Max's resentment grew stronger each day, poisoning his thoughts and actions. One night, Max stayed up late in the family's study, researching something secret and dark. On his computer, he searched for ways to get revenge, ways to take control of the life he believed was unfairly stolen from him. His eyes grew cold and calculating. He was no longer the lost younger brother. He was becoming something else, someone willing to go to extreme lengths. As Max planned in the shadows, Richard remained unaware of the storm building under his own roof. He continued with his busy life, preparing for the future and trying to keep the family together. To everyone else, the Harrisons were the picture of normalcy. But inside the walls of their home, a tragedy was quietly unfolding. The stage was set for something unimaginable. The quiet jealousy of a younger brother was about to explode into a nightmare that would shake the entire community. What no one expected was that this family's darkest secret would involve a disease thought to be long gone, a deadly infection that could kill and terrorize an entire town. This was not just a story of family rivalry. It was a story of betrayal, of plans made in silence, and of a shocking crime that would leave everyone questioning how well they really knew the people closest to them. The Harrison brothers' perfect family image was about to shatter, revealing the dangerous obsession lurking beneath. And it all began with a simple feeling, envy, that twisted into something deadly. The morning Richard Harrison fell ill was like any other, at least on the surface. He woke up early, as usual, ready to face the day with determination. But something was different. Instead of his normal energy, he felt weak and dizzy. A chill ran down his spine, and he noticed a fever creeping in, making him sweat even though the room was cold. At first, he brushed it off as a common flu, something he could shake off with rest and time. But the illness took a strange and terrifying turn. By midday, Richard's condition had worsened. His skin was pale, and his face was covered with dark, spreading blotches that looked like bruises but weren't painful. His body ached as if he had run a marathon, and his breathing became labored. Concerned, his wife insisted he visit the local hospital immediately. Richard agreed, though his mind was already clouded by discomfort and confusion. At the hospital, doctors ran tests. Blood samples, X-rays, and every routine examination imaginable. Yet nothing fit the symptoms Richard showed. The fever was high, but no common infections appeared. The swollen lymph nodes, particularly in his groin and armpits, puzzled the medical staff. These symptoms were rare and pointed to something unusual. Doctors gave him fluids and medicine to fight a possible infection, but the illness only deepened its grip. As hours passed, the hospital called in specialists. Richard's case was quickly becoming serious. His heart rate spiked unpredictably, and his fever remained stubbornly high. Nurses watched anxiously as his body temperature fluctuated between burning heat and cold sweats. The strange blotches on his skin spread rapidly, turning dark and crusty in some areas. The hospital staff whispered among themselves, trying to identify what kind of disease could act so aggressively. Medical history was reviewed carefully. Richard had no recent travel outside the country, no known exposure to sick people, and no dangerous hobbies that might explain the strange illness. He lived a normal, healthy life, with no history of diseases that might cause these symptoms. The mystery grew deeper. Samples from Richard's blood were sent to a specialized lab in a nearby city. This lab was equipped to test for rare and dangerous infections, illnesses that local hospitals could not identify. Days passed as Richard's condition teetered on the edge between life and death. His family waited anxiously outside the hospital, hoping for answers, desperate for hope. Then the results came back, shocking everyone involved. Richard was infected with Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague. The word alone sent a chill through the hospital halls. The plague was a disease from the past, one associated with medieval times, with terrible epidemics that had killed millions centuries ago. To hear it in the 21st century was almost unbelievable. Doctors confirmed it was not a simple case, but a severe form known as bubonic plague. The swollen lymph nodes, called buboes, explained the painful lumps in Richard's body. The plague, transmitted historically by fleas on rats, was now a serious and rare infection requiring immediate and specialized treatment. Hospital protocols were quickly put in place to isolate Richard and prevent any possible spread. The news spread through the town like wildfire. A man infected with the plague in their quiet community. It seemed impossible. The town's residents were terrified and confused. How could such a deadly disease appear in their modern world? People started to worry about their own safety, and rumors began to swirl. Local authorities launched an investigation to find out how Richard became infected. They looked into his daily routine, who he had contact with, and any possible exposure to animals or places where plague might exist. Nothing seemed to fit. Richard had not traveled to any known plague areas, had no contact with wild rodents or fleas, and had not been near any sick people. Doctors and scientists puzzled over the case, searching for answers that made sense. Theories were suggested: a rare exposure to infected animals, a lab accident, or even a deliberate infection. The last possibility seemed too extreme to many, but as investigators dug deeper, they found troubling clues. Meanwhile, Richard's condition remained critical. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, the plague was a ruthless enemy. The antibiotics given to treat it were powerful, but had to be administered quickly to be effective. Time was running out. Family and friends held their breath, watching the hospital room for any signs of improvement. Public health officials warned the community to be cautious, but assured them that the risk of spreading was low if proper precautions were taken. They traced Richard's contacts, screened people who had been near him, and monitored the situation closely. The town faced a mixture of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. How had this disease, almost extinct in the modern world, returned? With such a vengeance? The hospital staff worked tirelessly, keeping Richard alive while scientists continued their investigations. They studied the samples again, looking for any unusual features in the bacteria or clues about its origin. At the same time, detectives
started reviewing security footage, hospital records, and every piece of evidence that might shed light on the source of infection. Questions piled up. Was this really an accident?
Could someone have deliberately infected Richard? The idea seemed like something out of a horror story, but the strange places Max had been visiting, the secretive behavior, and the mysterious lab access suddenly took on new meaning. Investigators began to suspect that this was no ordinary illness, but part of something far darker. While the doctors fought to save Richard's life, the police quietly collected evidence and interviewed people connected to the family. They discovered that Max had recently bought medical supplies illegally, including syringes and rare bacterial cultures. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a disturbing picture. The town's peaceful facade was cracking, revealing the shadow beneath. The illness that had struck Richard was not just a tragic medical mystery, but a clue to a sinister crime. The very disease that had devastated humanity centuries ago had become a weapon, and the victim was the man who had everything. As Richard lay in the hospital bed, hooked to machines and fighting for every breath, the world around him was changing. The story of his illness was no longer just about medicine, but about betrayal, jealousy, and the dark lengths one person could go to destroy another. The plague had returned, not by chance, but by design, and its deadly purpose was about to be revealed. As the investigation into Richard Harrison's infection deepened, a disturbing truth began to emerge. Authorities were no longer convinced that Richard had contracted the plague by accident or from natural causes. The evidence pointed to something far more sinister. Someone had deliberately infected him. But who would do such a thing? And why? Detectives focused their attention on Max Harrison, Richard's younger brother. They discovered Max had been acting strangely in the days leading up to Richard's sudden illness. Surveillance footage showed Max visiting a high-security laboratory that specialized in dangerous pathogens. This was unusual because such facilities required special permissions, and Max had no official reason to be there. When questioned, Max gave vague answers, but his nervous behavior raised more suspicion than relief. Further searches uncovered that Max had recently acquired syringes and rare bacterial cultures through illegal channels. These weren't ordinary medical supplies. They were specialized equipment used in laboratories to handle deadly diseases. Authorities began to realize that Max had the means, opportunity, and knowledge to carry out a terrible plan. But the motive still remained unclear. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they found that Max's visits to the lab occurred just days before Richard fell ill. It became obvious that the infection was not a random event, but a calculated act. Max had somehow injected Richard with the plague, using his access to the dangerous bacteria. This revelation shocked everyone. The idea that someone would weaponize one of the deadliest diseases in history against their own brother seemed unimaginable. Investigators questioned friends, family, and colleagues of both brothers to understand what could have driven Max to such extremes. Jealousy quickly became the central theory. Max had always felt overshadowed by Richard's success. Richard's fortune, power, and respect in the community only deepened Max's feelings of resentment. It was believed that Max's envy had grown into a dangerous obsession, pushing him to eliminate his brother and claim the family fortune for himself. The financial angle added fuel to the fire. Richard was the primary owner of the family business, and his sudden death would transfer control and wealth to Max. The thought of inheriting a fortune, coupled with years of frustration and anger, seemed to explain Max's actions. But even As detectives uncovered this motive, they wondered how Max had gained the knowledge and access needed to carry out such a dark plan. Digging deeper into Max's background revealed a surprising fact. Max had a degree in biology, specializing in microbiology. Though he had never worked in the field professionally, his education gave him the technical understanding necessary to handle dangerous bacteria. This knowledge, combined with his secret visits to the lab, painted a clear picture. Max was not just jealous. He was willing and able to turn his envy into a deadly weapon. Authorities found a trail of emails and messages showing Max's attempts to acquire bacterial cultures from illegal sources. He had contacted underground networks that dealt with biological materials, risking severe penalties to obtain the plague bacteria. The chilling truth became clearer. Max had planned to infect his brother with a disease thought to be extinct in modern times, using science as his weapon. The investigators also uncovered Max's detailed notes and plans hidden in his room. These documents showed how he intended to infect Richard discreetly and avoid suspicion. Max had studied how the plague bacteria worked, how to administer it, and how to avoid detection. The amount of preparation and cold calculation shocked everyone. This was no crime of passion. It was a carefully crafted act of murder. The community was stunned. The brother who once seemed shy and harmless was now accused of one of the most horrifying crimes imaginable. People who had known Max found it hard to believe that he could become a cold-blooded killer. Yet, the evidence was overwhelming. As the investigation progressed, police discovered even more unsettling details. Max had taken steps to cover his tracks. He wiped surveillance cameras near the lab, deleted phone records, and tried to create false alibis. But technology and careful detective work eventually unraveled his lies. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Max had been planning this for months. While Max's actions were exposed, the question of how he had access to such dangerous bacteria remained a mystery. The lab where he had been seen was a government-controlled facility with strict security. Somehow, Max had managed to enter unnoticed and remove bacterial cultures. Officials launched a parallel investigation into the lab's security measures, fearing that others might also have unauthorized access. The case took another unexpected turn when investigators found traces of the plague bacteria on syringes in Max's possession. Forensic experts matched the samples with the bacteria found in Richard's blood. This forensic link provided undeniable proof that Max had infected his brother intentionally. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Max's motive still puzzled many. Why risk so much for revenge and greed? Some believed Max saw his brother's success as a constant reminder of his own failures, driving him to desperation. Others suspected deeper psychological problems. Anger and jealousy mixed with obsession had clouded Max's judgment completely. While Max awaited trial, the town grappled with the shocking betrayal. Families spoke in hushed tones about trust and loyalty, wondering how well anyone really knows those closest to them. The Harrison family's tragedy became a chilling example of how love and hate can intertwine dangerously. Meanwhile, Richard remained in the hospital, slowly recovering but forever changed by the attack. The disease had left lasting damage, both physical and emotional. His survival was a miracle, but the pain of betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Richard's life, once full of hope and success, was now marked by suspicion and sorrow. As the trial approached, the case drew national attention. News outlets called it one of the most bizarre and terrifying crimes of the decade. The idea of biological weapons used in personal vendettas shocked the public and raised questions about security and ethics in scientific research. Max's trial revealed every detail of his plan and crime. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and greed who used forbidden knowledge to try to kill his own brother. The courtroom was tense as evidence was presented, and the jury faced the difficult task of understanding how someone so close could become so dangerous. In the end, Max was found guilty. The court sentenced him to life in prison without parole, condemning his actions as a cold, calculated attempt to murder. The verdict brought some closure but left many questions unanswered, especially about the hidden dangers of biological research and the thin line between science and weaponry. The story of Max and Richard Harrison remains a haunting reminder that sometimes the most deadly threats come not from strangers, but from the darkest corners of family rivalry. The case also highlighted the importance of vigilance in protecting society from the misuse of scientific knowledge, a warning that echoes far beyond the small town where the crime took place. After Max Harrison's arrest, the community struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The peaceful town, once proud of the Harrison family, now felt haunted by betrayal and fear. People wondered how someone could turn such a deadly disease into a personal weapon, and how close they had come to a disaster much worse than anyone had imagined. The investigation into the lab where Max had obtained the plague bacteria revealed serious security lapses. Officials found that several protocols designed to protect dangerous pathogens had been ignored or bypassed. Surveillance cameras were outdated and some alarms had been disabled. The fact that Max, an unauthorized visitor, had managed to gain access to such a deadly bacterium raised alarm bells not only locally, but across the country. A full-scale government inquiry was launched to review how dangerous biological materials were stored and controlled. The incident exposed weaknesses that could have allowed other criminals or terrorists to get their hands on harmful agents. The country's biosecurity measures were scrutinized under the public spotlight, and urgent reforms were demanded. The scientific community reacted with shock and concern. The idea that a person could use knowledge and access to such deadly bacteria for personal revenge was a terrifying new reality. Experts debated how to prevent such abuses in the future while continuing important medical research. The case became a symbol of the risks hidden within advanced science, powerful tools that could be misused if not carefully guarded. Meanwhile, Richard Harrison's recovery was slow and painful. Though he survived the infection, the disease had caused permanent damage to his body. His immune system was weakened, and he was left with scars from the illness. More than the physical harm, the emotional toll was overwhelming. To be attacked by someone so close, with a disease that could kill him, shook Richard to his core. In the weeks after Richard returned home from the hospital, the family faced an uncertain future. Trust had been broken, and the wounds ran deep. The community, too, was divided. Some sympathized with Max's frustrations, while most condemned his actions as unforgivable. Friends and neighbors found it difficult to look at the Harrison family without thinking of the terrible crime that had occurred behind closed doors. Richard decided to speak out publicly about his experience. He wanted to raise awareness about the dangers of biological weapons, the importance of strong security, and the risks of jealousy and bitterness within families. His interviews were emotional and honest, revealing not only his suffering but also the larger lessons that could be learned from his story. The documentary team began filming Richard's journey. They captured his physical struggles, the support of his loved ones, and the moments when he reflected on the betrayal that had almost ended his life. Richard's story became a powerful message about forgiveness, resilience, and the fight to Rebuild after tragedy. Max Harrison's trial also became a focal point for public attention. Courtroom footage showed the grim determination of the prosecution and the defense's attempts to explain Max's troubled past. The trial revealed the careful planning Max had put into his crime and the coldness with which he had carried it out. Witnesses described Max's growing obsession with his brother and the lengths he went to hide his actions. The jury's decision was unanimous. Max was found guilty of attempted murder using a biological agent, a rare and serious charge that carried the harshest penalties. The judge's sentencing speech highlighted the betrayal of family trust and the danger posed by abusing scientific knowledge. Max's life sentence without parole sent a clear message that such crimes would not be tolerated. As the years passed, the Harrison family worked to heal. Richard focused on advocacy, speaking at conferences about biosecurity and family mental health. He supported new laws aimed at tightening controls on dangerous pathogens and improving mental health services for those struggling with jealousy, anger, or obsession. The town, while never fully forgetting the tragedy, slowly returned to normal life. People became more aware of the hidden risks in their community and the importance of watching for signs of trouble among friends and family. The Harrison story served as a constant reminder that beneath calm surfaces, dangerous storms can sometimes brew. The documentary also examined the ethical questions raised by the case. How should society balance the need for scientific research with the risks of misuse? What measures should be taken to protect people from rare but deadly diseases? And how can families prevent jealousy and resentment from turning into violence? Experts interviewed for the documentary emphasized the need for stronger biosecurity laws, better mental health support, and greater public awareness. The story of the Harrison brothers became a catalyst for important discussions on science, safety, and human emotions. One surprising development came when new evidence suggested Max might not have acted entirely alone. Investigators uncovered connections between Max and a small underground group interested in biological weapons. Though no one else was charged, the discovery raised concerns about wider threats and the potential for similar crimes in the future. This added a layer of complexity to the case, showing how dangerous knowledge and resentment can combine in unexpected ways. The town organized memorial events and educational programs to honor the lessons learned from the tragedy. Schools included talks about the importance of family support, conflict resolution, and the dangers of unchecked jealousy. The community's efforts aimed to build a stronger, safer environment where such a crime would never happen again. For Richard, the road ahead was challenging but hopeful. Despite his pain and losses, he found purpose in turning his suffering into a force for good. His courage inspired others to speak openly about difficult family issues and the risks of silence and secrets. The story of Max and Richard Harrison, once a private tragedy, had grown into a public warning. It was a chilling example of how science and human emotions can collide with deadly consequences. And it was a call to action, to protect not only our bodies but our minds and relationships from the dangers that lie beneath. The town, the country, and even the world watched as the Harrison family rebuilt their lives, forever changed, but determined to face the future with strength and hope. The plague, once thought to be a disease of the past, had returned in the most unexpected way, leaving behind a legacy that would never be forgotten. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict. The trial of Max. Harrison had gripped the nation, capturing the attention of millions who followed every detail of this horrifying case. The story of a brother injecting plague into his own sibling to kill him had seemed almost unbelievable at first. But now it was reality, a chilling reminder of how far envy and desperation could drive a person. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, the tension was almost unbearable. Every eye was fixed on the door, waiting for the decision that would seal Max's fate. When the foreperson stood to announce the verdict, the room held its breath. Guilty. The word echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Max Harrison was found guilty of attempted murder using a biological weapon. The judge's sentencing was swift and harsh, a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The sentence sent a clear message that such cold, calculated crimes would never be tolerated. But just as the courtroom was beginning to settle, a shocking new development emerged. During the sentencing, the defense attorney requested a final hearing to present evidence that could change everything. The judge agreed, intrigued by the possibility of new information in such a high-profile case. The new evidence was a recorded message, found on a hidden USB drive in Max's belongings. The video showed Max confessing, not just to infecting Richard, but also revealing someone else's involvement, a person he claimed had pressured him into committing the crime. The identity of this shadowy figure was kept secret initially, but investigators quickly traced the clues to a surprising suspect, a respected scientist who had worked at the lab where Max had stolen the plague bacteria. This scientist, Dr. Evelyn Marks, was known for her brilliant mind and dedication to medical research. Yet the evidence suggested a darker side. According to Max's confession, Dr. Marks had been conducting illegal experiments with dangerous pathogens. She had feared exposure and loss of funding, so she coerced Max to create a distraction by infecting Richard. The plan was to shift attention away from her own wrongdoing. Max's jealousy and rage made him the perfect pawn. The revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community and law enforcement. Dr. Marks was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including bioterrorism and conspiracy to commit murder. Her trial exposed a web of deceit, illegal research, and ethical violations that rocked the foundations of scientific trust. Meanwhile, Richard Harrison's story took another turn. Despite all he had endured, he chose to forgive his brother publicly, emphasizing that hatred would only prolong the pain. Richard's courage in facing such betrayal won him sympathy and admiration worldwide. He used his voice to campaign for stricter controls on biological research and better mental health resources, hoping to prevent tragedies like his own. The town that had once been divided began to heal. Community leaders organized workshops on conflict resolution and emotional well-being, stressing the importance of family support and communication. Schools introduced programs teaching students about jealousy, anger, and the dangers of hidden resentments. Richard's recovery continued, though the scars from the plague were permanent. He became an advocate not just for biosecurity, but also for victims of family violence and emotional abuse. His experience showed that harm could come in many forms, sometimes from the people closest to us. As Dr. Marks faced trial, disturbing details about her experiments emerged. She had been attempting to create genetically modified bacteria, hoping to find new treatments for diseases, but her reckless actions endangered countless lives. The court sentenced her to decades in prison, sending a strong message to researchers about ethical responsibility. The entire saga forced governments and scientific institutions worldwide to rethink their policies. New regulations were introduced to tighten access to dangerous pathogens, improve lab security, and increase transparency in research. International collaborations worked to prevent misuse of biological knowledge and technology. In a surprising twist, further investigations revealed that the underground network Max had contacted was far more extensive than initially thought. Authorities uncovered plots to use biological agents as weapons in other crimes, leading to a series of arrests and dismantling of illicit labs. The Harrison case had opened a Pandora's box, revealing threats that had been hidden in the shadows. Despite the darkness that had engulfed their lives, the Harrison family found moments of peace. Richard's wife and children stood by him, offering strength and hope. The family's story became one of resilience, showing that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and support. The documentary crew captured these moments of healing and hope, ending their film with Richard speaking directly to viewers. He urged everyone to cherish their loved ones, to seek help when struggling with negative emotions, and to support efforts to keep dangerous science safe. The legacy of this tragic case was a powerful warning, a reminder of the thin line between love and hate, science and danger, trust and betrayal. It showed how human emotions could turn deadly when mixed with knowledge and opportunity. As the film ended, viewers were left with a haunting thought. In a world of incredible scientific advances, the greatest threat might still come from the darkness within ourselves.